We'll fast forward to this incident. So 1990, after Bob becomes known all over the world because of this series, he splits up with his wife. He's very lonely, and he makes a really bad decision to get involved with this prostitute who had a little operation in a neighborhood, and he helped her. And when I found out about it, I thought he was joking. And I said, well, show it to me. And he took me there, and I thought, oh my God, my life flashed before my eyes. This is going to be disastrous. So I said, you got to shut this down, and I got to tell the police. And he had told me there were two vice cops who knew this woman who had, they were aware of what she did. They'd been to visit the place and see her. One of them had a crush on her. They didn't arrest her. They just took a pass on it. So I called Metro. I called the undersheriff at the time and told him what was going on. I said, it's done. It's shut down. I'm not getting into this whole thing about these vice cops. I just want to let you know. And then boom, they come and arrest Lazar. They charge him with pandering. The woman who had been in prostitution, working as a prostitute since Lazar was 12 years old, becomes a witness that it's all his fault, and they go after her. Give me your sense of the fact that they were proposing felony and prison terms and all that stuff for these allegations, the criminal charges.
Well, back in that day, it was absurd to see someone not only charged with pandering, but to the point that they're talking pandering felony with prison time. I mean, there were pimps on every corner back in the day, driving around in their BMWs, monitoring their girls on the corners of the strip. And yet here we got this guy who was essentially, Bob was just doing books for him, I think, is what the bottom thing was, other than having maybe a crush on that lady. But he was doing books for him. And here they are, they were actively pursuing, trying to see this man go to prison for that.
The parole and probation report, you'll recall, I have a copy of it. I'll have to look up the names, but the parole and probation people wanted him to go to prison because they were angry, in part because they couldn't verify his employment and education history. He told them the same story he told us, where he'd gone to school, where he'd worked, and claimed that he worked out there. And they were angry about it. They wanted him to do hard time.
They were angry because they felt as though he had to be lying to them, but he stuck to his guns. His story has never wavered over the years. And I mean, this has been 1989 we're talking about. I was a young police officer back in those days. And I mean, Bob's story has not, if you know the guy, which you do, I mean, nothing's ever changed. I mean, it's never varied. It's always been very consistent. He hasn't embellished anything. If anything else, he's tried to go back and clarify some things that other people maybe have misconstrued over the years, but yeah, the PSI unit, which is pre-sentence investigation with P&P, usually that's all those folks do is a lot of them don't even actively monitor a caseload. All they do is write pre-sentence reports and turn them over. But yeah, it was almost like it was a personal issue. And they couldn't get him to budge off of his story. They couldn't even rattle him back in those days to get him to try to change or stumble or anything.
They ran into roadblocks in trying to get this information. They didn't find out he lied. They just couldn't get the information to confirm it.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I know there was information. I mean, even with the Los Alamos, with him working at Los Alamos, I mean, they deny it completely, but yet he's in a phone book somewhere, just unless there's another Bob Lazar somewhere with a rocket car.
Judge Lehman, who's now departed, but he got the case. You told me a story recently that I don't recall hearing, that there was pressure put on him, that some people showed up in his office about this case.
That's absolutely, there's no other way to put it, because I actually saw the guys. I heard Judge Lehman's voice. Judge Lehman's chambers were right next to the chambers of Judge McGroarty's. So Judge Lehman was a very excitable kind of guy. And if something was said to him that he didn't like, he was not embarrassed to express his opinions or get angry, raise his voice. When these two generic white guy investigators show up back in the day. I mean, they suits without ties. I can remember it very clearly because of my interest, number one. But they came there, they explained to the judge, as the judge later said to me, because he called me into chambers later to ask me a few questions. I knew Judge Lehman very well, worked around him for many years. He wanted to know what the scoop was, is why there was such an interest in seeing this gentleman put away in prison over a pandering charge that nobody gave a crap about, essentially. I mean, in the real world. And, I explained to him my thoughts on it and as to why, because I already met Bob back in the day and knew him and had what a little relationship I had with him through you. So I just tried to sit down and explain to Judge Lehman my point of view on the whole thing and what my beliefs were, whether he was telling the truth or not. I really do believe that we all walked away with the thoughts of Judge Lehman believing it. And I know when it came down to Bob's sentencing that it was definitely not what the state wanted. I mean, Bob never did any time. He got a small amount of probation, if I remember right, maybe 2 years. Luckily, nothing serious happened to Bob, because I guarantee you if he'd have went to prison, he wouldn't be around now. That wouldn't have happened.
Did the judge tell you what these two people had said to him, and did he tell you who they worked for?
There was no mention of who they worked for whatsoever, other than they were like, generic government agency types, more than likely like DOD. What I can tell you in the part that we never discussed was a couple years after that incident, I was out on Nellis Air Force Base in the Judge Advocate General's office. Anytime we enter a base on an investigation, we had to go check in with JAG, make sure they knew what we were doing, who we wanted to see, the whole 9 yards, in case we were to make an arrest while we were out there on federal reservation. In any event, when I was sitting in the JAG office waiting to talk to whatever JAG officer I was there to speak with that day, one of those two guys came out of my back office and walked right by me, and he looked right into my eyes. I looked right in his eyes, and it was like that unacknowledged acknowledgement, and he just went out the door. But I just always thought that was funny, that's where I see the guy.
Well, the sense that you got from the judge was that they leaned on him. They wanted him to sentence Lazar to do some time.
Absolutely. They wanted him to follow they always want them to follow the PSI requests that they make, but they also, most probation officers, at least back in the day, were more law enforcement oriented. And a lot of times, if they recommended something, a judge wouldn't follow their guidelines to the letter. They'd lighten it up a little bit, or, whatever they thought was appropriate. But these guys came in and told the judge pretty much, this is what we need you to do. This is what you're going to do for us. And with Judge, like I said, if you knew Judge Lehman, that didn't fly.
So he was irate about somebody from the Department of Defense coming there and leaning on him and telling him how he should sentence a criminal defendant.
Absolutely. This is exactly what happened.
So a lot of interest in that pandering case. A lot of media were there because we had done these stories about Lazar. There's pressure, as you mentioned, from unknown agents who are trying to lean on the judge. There was a lot of information that we got from Congressman Bill Bray and others who said, hey, we've been trying to investigate this guy and help secure his records. And we were told, you don't have a need to know, basically. So it was an interesting time period. And I think Lazar, to be frank, was really concerned about going to prison and considered maybe just going on the run as opposed to getting sentenced to hard time. So it was really important. I didn't want him to make that mistake, obviously, because it would have messed up his whole life. So we were trying to get a sense of what was going to happen. And I've never revealed it before, but you were very helpful in trying to, in sort of altering the course of all of our lives by giving a hint about what was going to unfold.
Yeah, I was concerned. I really thought Bob was possibly going to make a huge mistake, and tried to explain to him that no matter, what, if you take off, it's going to be a short-term, what's the word I'm looking for? Short-term experience, because they're going to catch you. I mean, then you're really going to be screwed. And I tried to, go ahead. I thought you were going to say something. Oh,
No.
I tried to explain to him that what little bit I could explain to Judge Lehman in regards to his situation, I felt as though Judge Lehman was going to give him a square deal. And I just tried to convey that to him and make him as comfortable as I could with all of that.
And that's what happened. I mean, we conveyed that information to Bob. He showed up, got sentenced. It was it was an appropriately light sentence for the offense, and life went on. Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, be honest though, if it was anybody else, I don't even think it would have gone that far. It would have been dealt at a misdemeanor level in a justice court with a fine, and that's about it. Because they certainly weren't doing that with any of the other guys that were out there that were allegedly involved in prostitution or pimping or, procuring, whatever.
Yeah, so you would see those cases in court all the time. It's not a really big deal to have it multiple felony counts pursued with that kind of vigor. No negotiating it down, no reaching a plea deal. The P&P recommending prison time. It was unusual.
It was extremely unusual. There were a lot of hardcore guys out on the street doing the exact same thing that were really the brains of their operation. And I mean, there's no other word you'd call it but a pimp. And I mean, these guys are being overlooked on a daily basis or occasionally paying a fine if they get caught with a girl in the car that they couldn't explain their relationship. But they certainly weren't in front of a district court judge being considered for a prison term. And I'm talking about hardcore criminals with records. So yeah, it was, you might say it was a bit odd.